What happened to the class clown after graduation? For context, I graduated high school 4 years ago, and back then, Eric was the class clown. Like, not just someone who made a few jokes, but the guy who would do anything for a laugh. He once filled the principal's office with ping pong balls that poured out when she opened the door, convinced the lunch staff he was allergic to the color green, and even streaked across the football field during a rival game with Go Tigers painted on his back. Everyone thought he was hilarious, even the teachers secretly, except Ms. Harrison, who hated him with a burning passion. Anyway, I hadn't seen or heard from Eric since graduation. We weren't close friends or anything, just classmates who occasionally talked. I honestly kind of forgot about him until yesterday, when I went to my cousin Brittany's wedding. The ceremony was beautiful, but during the reception I noticed this super quiet guy sitting alone at one of the tables, barely touching his food and not talking to anyone. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Brittany came over and was like, "Have you talked to Eric yet?" And I was genuinely confused because the only Eric I knew was class clown Eric, and this serious, withdrawn guy looked nothing like the wild person I remembered. But OMG, it was him. Same person, completely different vibe. I went over to say hi, thinking maybe he just didn't recognize me. He mumbled a hello and I sat down trying to make conversation. The whole time he kept glancing around the room like he was checking for exits or something. His hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his water glass, and I noticed a small scar across his knuckles that definitely wasn't there in high school. I asked how he knew Brittany, turns out his mom and her mom are friends, and tried to bring up some of the funny stuff from high school like, remember when you put all those rubber ducks in the swimming pool during finals? Thinking it might make him smile? His reaction was so weird. He didn't laugh or even smile. He just stared at me with this empty look and said, "That was a different person," in this flat voice. The conversation was super awkward after that. I asked what he'd been up to since graduation, and he just shrugged and said, "Not much." When I pressed a little, he mentioned he'd been away for a while but didn't elaborate. I asked if he was in college or working, and he just said neither right now, and changed the subject to ask about me. Then Randy, another old classmate, spotted us and came over all excited. "Holy shit, it's the Eric!" he practically shouted, slapping Eric on the back. Eric flinched so hard at the contact that he knocked over his water glass. Randy didn't notice and kept going on about the good old days, and asked Eric to tell the story about the time he stole the mascot costume before the championship game. Eric just stood up without saying anything and walked outside. Randy looked at me like, "WTF?" and I just shrugged because I was equally confused. I found Eric about 20 minutes later sitting alone on a bench in the garden area. I sat down and asked if he was okay, and he didn't answer for a long time. Then, without looking at me, he asked if I ever thought about Lisa. Lisa was in our class. She was quiet, kind of a loner, but super smart. I hadn't thought about her in years, TBH, and I told him that. His jaw tightened and he just nodded like I'd confirmed something for him. She was the only one who ever called me out, he said. Everyone else just laughed or looked the other way. I had no idea what he was talking about. Called him out for what? His pranks? They were harmless. Everyone thought they were funny. When I said this, he finally turned to look at me and his eyes were intense, like he was seeing right through me. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said. "None of you ever did." I asked what he meant, and he just shook his head and stood up to leave. But then he paused and said something that has been echoing in my head ever since. "You know what happened after graduation? Life happened. Reality happened. Consequences happened." Then he walked away. I was completely confused and kind of freaked out, so I went to find Brittany to ask what was up with Eric. She pulled me into an empty hallway and lowered her voice to tell me the story. Apparently, 2 months after graduation, Eric was driving home from a party. He wasn't drunk. Toxicology reports confirmed this. But he was speeding and lost control of his car on a curve. He crashed into another car coming from the opposite direction. The driver of the other car was seriously injured but survived. The passenger didn't. The passenger was Lisa. Eric was charged with reckless driving resulting in death. He spent almost 2 years in juvenile detention since he was still 17 when it happened. He just got out 3 months ago. Brittany said Lisa had actually confronted Eric at graduation about his behavior, telling him his pranks were getting dangerous and somebody was going to get hurt if he didn't grow up. She was the only person who ever stood up to him instead of encouraging him, and then she died because of him.